Now, as you know, after recovering quickly from the global financial crisis, the Indian economy has decelerated, growing at 6.2% and an estimated 5% in 2011-12 and 2012-13 respectively. Now, the question that many of you have is, why have we slowed? Essentially, it is due to a combination of factors, both external and domestic, with the predominant weight on the domestic factors. The boost to demand given by the monetary and fiscal stimulus following the global financial crisis, coupled with supply-side constraints, led to higher inflation, and we had a powerful monetary response which slowed consumption. The annual growth of private final consumption expenditure declined considerably to 4% in 2012-13 from 8% in the previous year. Corporate and infrastructure investment also slowed as a result both of policy bottlenecks as well as the tight monetary policy, with corporate sector investment declining by 2.8 percentage points of GDP in 2011-12. We also had external factors, the faltering global growth due to the euro crisis and uncertainty over fiscal problems in the United States. That, coupled with a weak monsoon, at least in its early phase, were further hits to a slowing economy. So these are the various reasons we have slowed and keep pace with a spending which was exacerbated by higher subsidies. The net result has been a higher fiscal deficit and reduced government savings. Household financial savings also fell sharply to 8 percentage points of GDP in 2011-12 from 10.4% in the previous year. With both government and private savings shrinking significantly, and with only a moderate fall in overall investment, the current account deficit, which, as you know, is the investment that we cannot finance with domestic savings, but has to be financed by borrowing from abroad, that current account deficit widened to 4.2% of GDP in 2011-12 and to 4.6% of GDP in the first half of 2012-13, exceeding 5% in the last quarter. We have to bring the twin deficits down to reduce the scale of our external as well as our internal borrowing. WPI inflation has come down in recent months. The last reading was 6.6% year-on-year in January 2013, down from a high of 9.9% in October 2011. But CPI inflation continues to be in double digits, which is worrisome, owing partly to high food inflation and the high weightage of food in the CPI basket. So put it all together, a high fiscal deficit, falling investment, falling savings, a high current account deficit, and high consumer price inflation, all in an environment of very moderate and uncertain world growth, as well as jittery global investors. It all suggests the urgent need for macroeconomic stabilization. India is in a difficult situation. Now, given yesterday's test win, a cricket analogy may be appropriate. We are batting on a sticky wicket, but the sun, reflecting our own strong underlying potential, will dry the pitch out. Until that time, we have to play carefully, focusing on shoring up our position with sensible, prudent actions rather than flashy attempts to hit over the top. Returning to economics, India is in a difficult situation, I said, but it is by no means in an impossible situation. India's growth out of poverty into middle income will be the great story of our times. A return to high growth looks improbable today, but paraphrasing Nelson Mandela, it always looks improbable until it's done. There should be no doubt that we have both the strategy as well as the underlying fundamentals to get back on track. What we need is continuing action, and what we have to be wary of is complacency. The way forward lies in policies to achieve the following objectives. We need to revive growth, and we need to rebalance national spending from consumption to investment. Amongst other things, this requires increasing government savings, especially by reducing distortionary subsidies. Those of you who've already been through the survey may see box 1.3 in chapter 1 on who gets the subsidies associated with gas cylinders. I'm sure it will make an interesting read. Second, we need to increase opportunities for savers to get strong real returns on financial investments. Box 1.2 in Chapter 1 links gold purchases to high inflation and low returns on financial assets. And Box 1.4 offers explanations for the decline in financial savings. Lower inflation will help improve returns for savers and will help again increase financial savings. The third thing we need to do is remove bottlenecks to investment and job creation. Box 1.1 in Chapter 1 describes some of the reasons why certain projects have stalled. We need to remove the bottlenecks to large investments, and I'm hopeful that the Cabinet Committee on Investment will make an enormous difference here. Large investments, once they start up again, will produce orders for small companies, but we also need to directly encourage the growth of small and medium-sized firms in the economy. Fourth, we need to reduce the cost for borrowers for raising financing, and this means continuing broadening of the investor base in the economy and reducing transaction costs in the financial sector. The second big thing we need to do, apart from reorienting spending and encouraging growth, is to contain inflation, both through monetary measures as well as through supply-side measures. Now, over the last few months, the government has announced a number of measures which take us along the road that I've talked about. They include raising diesel prices and capping gas cylinders, which will help reduce subsidies and government spending, thus reducing the fiscal deficit and helping to contain the import bill. Two potential ongoing or probable fiscal reforms are noteworthy. First, the possible implementation of GST on the revenue side. This will not only reduce the cost of doing business across the country by creating a seamless national market where goods and services can go without high transaction costs all over the country, but also it will make businesses, bring more businesses into the tax net, increasing our revenue base. A second major possibility is the direct benefit transfer scheme, which could possibly reduce our expenditures even while giving the poor more choice, reducing leakages, as well as the distortions associated with subsidizing commodities directly. Among the other measures the government has taken towards the path that I've talked about include the Cabinet Committee on Investment, which I referred to, as also the plan to restructure the debts of state power distribution companies, which include incentives for them to charge reasonable tariffs. Liberalization of FDI norms, greater investment in irrigation, warehousing and cold storage, and programs to increase the production of various kinds of foods are part of the greater program to restore macroeconomic stability. Let me emphasize that in this process, fighting inflation will be a joint effort, with the RBI controlling the interest-sensitive components of demand and the government helping through credible fiscal consolidation as well as measures to boost food supply in the fight against inflation. Going forward, credible budgetary plans for fiscal consolidation together with greater agricultural production should help reduce inflation, giving the RBI more room for monetary accommodation. Before leaving the subject of inflation, let me mention that we have done our bit by reducing the number of pages in the survey by 20% or so, thus breaking the trend towards page inflation, the excess demand for paper and ink, and the call on your time, assuming, of course, that you all diligently read the survey cover to cover. With improved sentiment, measures towards further easing of regulatory and financial impediments to investment, and with the global economy likely to recover somewhat in 2013, though with fits and starts, we expect the outlook to improve and growth to be in the range 6.1% to 6.7% in 2013-14. Now, this is a range, and it is a fairly wide range, but the reason we offer a range is because the set of possible outcomes is wider than usual, given the uncertainty surrounding the timing and the size of the economic rebound. In other words, at turning points which we believe we are in, it is harder to predict the path of GDP, and therefore we are more comfortable offering a range of possible outcomes. Let me turn finally to chapter 2, in which we talk about the medium-term challenges that are important for this economy, more specifically the challenge of seizing the demographic dividend. Now, even though the current environment is somewhat difficult, as I've stated, the future holds tremendous promise for India, provided, of course, we can seize the demographic dividend. Nearly half the additions to the Indian labor force over the period 2011 to 30 will be in the age group 30 to 49, which presumably accounts for about 95% of this room. The medium-run question addressed in Chapter 2 is where will good jobs come from for the millions of youth who will be entering the labor force in this country or leaving agriculture to go to jobs in industry and services. Now, more than half the population today depends on agriculture, but the experience of other countries, which we document in that chapter, suggests that the number of people in agriculture will shrink rapidly, especially if we follow the path in other countries, but also if per capita incomes in agriculture are to go up substantially. Now, under an assumption of unchanged policies and parameters, if India's share of employment in agriculture declines as did China's over a similar period, and even if more youth enter the labor force and we reap the demographic dividend, we should be relatively okay. We will be able to place almost all those entering the labor force in jobs by 2020, provided everything goes as it has been going over the last 10 years. At first glance, therefore, that suggests little cause for alarm. But the chapter goes on to suggest two reasons we need to be concerned going forward and why we need to increase the emphasis on policies to create good jobs. First, even small changes in assumed parameters lead to a worrisome shortfall of jobs. For example, as more women enter the labor force after receiving a good education and look for jobs outside the household, labor participation rates naturally increase. They've increased in many other countries who had a similar experience, who had a similar path as India's. With even a small change, a small increase in participation rates, the number of jobs that we need to create to accommodate these people looking for jobs will go up into the tens of millions. And that is a source of concern. We need to up the rate of job creation to absorb those people. Second, even if everyone gets jobs, following the pattern that we've had over the last decades, too few people are getting jobs in the highly productive service sector, while too many people are getting jobs in the low productivity segments of industry. So the challenge for the country is to create the conditions for faster growth of good productive jobs outside of agriculture, especially jobs in organized manufacturing and in services, even while we spend time and effort increasing productivity in agriculture. So there's a lot to be done, and the chapter calls for reforms in various areas, some of which are already underway. Clearly, we need to examine the regulations that govern small business so that the costs of entry, growth, and exit are reduced. Too many businesses in India stay small too long and don't have the incentive to grow. Instead, we should focus on incentivizing them to grow, and box 2.4 in that chapter looks at it. We also need to ensure adequate protection and minimum safety nets for informal workers, even while increasing labor flexibility. Too many Indian workers go unprotected and don't have even the minimal set of protections and insurance. We have to also build out infrastructure like the industrial regions in the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor that can be easily used by small and medium enterprises with minimal overhead and setup costs. In other words, we have to reduce the costs of doing business. We have to expand access to finance, and we have to build human capital, including vocational training and apprenticeship programs. Now, a number of these are issues that the government is seized with, is working on. We need to continue that work. Let me end by stating categorically that the best form of inclusion is a good job. Therefore, the benefit of rising to the challenge of job creation is decades of strong and inclusive growth. Now, the survey has a lot more. The summary that you have with you should hopefully whet your appetite and make you look for more. That said, all of us are open for questions.